Oh, it's an intense pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. So I will talk to you about autism, genes, medicine, and neurodiversity. So first, I work in Paris. I work at the Institut Pasteur in Paris, but my lab, the door of my lab, is at the hospital with wonderful people, clinicians, who see the family, they talk to the family, they explore what's going on, and then they provide the data to the researchers. And sometimes we can find a gene, we can make a little mouse that is carrying the mutation, I will show you this, and then we go back to the clinician. So it's really a collaboration. We are working in Europe, so I'm connected with different projects, and the last one is called R2D2 Mental Health that I coordinate. R2D2 for risk, resilience, and developmental diversity in mental health. And why I call this project R2D2? Because we really need to work with people with autism. We forgot a little bit the people with autism. So now we are working with people with autism, the parents, to better understand what's going on, and not only autism, yes or no, but the neurodiversity. So you might know, but autism is very, very complex. We call it autism plus in my lab. So it's difficulties in, or atypicalities in social interaction, restrictive pattern of interest. But so it's very diverse. That's why we have a S, autisms. But it's also very plus because it's super rare that autism is isolated. Sometimes it comes with intellectual disability, sometimes it comes with epilepsy, sometimes it comes with sleep disorder, and sometimes, I mean most of the time, these are the problems for people with autism, not really autism per se. Unfortunately, and this is why it is really important to understand better autism, is that the life expectancy is much lower than the general population. And this is due to accident, epilepsy, and suicide. There is about 3 to 8 males for 1 female. I still don't know why, but what we understand, what we know, is that we are very bad in diagnosis of females with autism. We are much better now, so there is more females diagnosed with autism, and I think it's super important because some girls, they really suffer if they don't have the diagnosis. So it's super important that we have a better recognition of autism in girls. And the prevalence, the frequency in the population is about 1 to 2%. But it was not always like this. So it grows like this, very, very high during the last decades. And so why this? Because there is a lot of awareness. There is also a change in the diagnosis. And so to give you an example, this is a person with autism, Stephen Shore, and he wrote the book Autism for Dummies. And I was in New York, and he gave a talk, and he said, it's easy, autism has increased exactly at the same rate as FedEx package. So, of course, there is no correlation between the FedEx package and autism, but he said that almost everything that goes up was one day associated with autism. And then he said, can you tell me what is between the E and the X in FedEx? Okay, I couldn't see it, but look. There is an arrow. So now every time you will see a FedEx package, you will see the arrow, you will think of me, you will think about autism, and so on. So what Stephen Shore said is that autism is a little bit like the arrow of FedEx. Now that you know it, that you know that there is an arrow, you can see it. So it's really super important to understand that we are much aware. This is a really beautiful paper by Santosh in US, where he looked, you see, you have an increase of people with autism in the last 10 years. But you also have a decrease, you have an increase of autism, but you have a decrease of individuals with intellectual disability. So what's going on? In the clinicians now, when they see a child with intellectual disability, They can also look at social interaction, repetitive behavior, and so now they have a diagnosis with autism. Especially in US, and I don't know if it's the same in Chile, but if you have a child with autism, you have more support than if you have a child with intellectual disability. I think it's totally unfair for the parents with a child with intellectual disability. And so sometimes the clinicians, they make a diagnosis of autism. So my work is to identify what's going on, to understand, and then to help. And I think you first need to identify, you really need to understand to help. So, genes are not coding for autism. It's much more complex. You have different steps. Genes are making proteins sometimes. Sometimes they can make a synapse, like a contact between the neurons in your brain. And these neurons will communicate, and then you will have a connection, and you will remember what I said today. And it's not only autism. It's also, they can contribute to anxiety, to epilepsy, to cognition, and to sensory motor problem. And I think that's super important. I mean, there is not a gene for autism, but these genes can make a difference. And there is always a context. Really don't understand that genes are the fatality. It's gene will make something, and then in a context will make something else. So the context can be very different if you're a child, if you're a baby, if you're a child, if you're an adolescent, or if you're an adult. So this is my life. This is about 3 billion of letters, ATGC, in your genome. And the difference between you and me is 1 in 1,000. Here. So we are almost the same, but for some genetic variations are there. So between you and me, we have about 3 million of variants. Sometimes it's green. It makes no difference. You have a T, I have a C, makes no difference. Sometimes it's a small difference. You could have blonde hair or red hair, and it's a small difference. And sometimes it's a very large difference, and you will have a disease, for example. But when I sequence the DNA, I don't have the color. So all my lab is trying to understand if these variations are small, medium, or large effect. So this is not as simple as this, with the papa like this, the maman like this, and the child like this. So the heritability is not so easy, but sometimes it can be a single gene. So this is what we found 20 years ago. We found that a single variation in one of these 3 billion of variants, one single variation, could lead to autism. And these genes were coding for synapse, this contact between your brain cells. So this is the family. In genetics, a square is a male and a circle is a female. So there is one boy in black here who has autism, and his brother, he has Asperger's syndrome. He wanted to be a nurse, then he wanted to be a taxi driver. He knows all the streets of Göteborg. It's a family from Sweden. And they have, normally you have a TTT. Here you have TTTT, so just one extra letter. And you have something that is different in terms of social interaction and language. Here, in this family, a few years after, we found that just one copy of the gene, just one, you have 2 copies, one from your father, one from your mother. One copy of the gene is missing, and you have no speech. And sometimes you have intellectual disability, and sometimes you have epilepsy. And this gene is called SHANK3. It's one of the major genes now for autism plus intellectual disability. So this is the most important slide. You have different genetic architecture. Sometimes it's a single variation, and you have something as complex as autism. But sometimes it's thousands of variations that will make you different. So in the parents, it's maybe subthreshold. You don't have the diagnosis. but it will accumulate in the child, and the child will have more probability to have autism. So for this part, the monogenic, what we call monogenic forms, so one single gene, you have about 1,800 genes that are in neurodevelopmental disorder, what we say. So it can be autism. We have about 200 genes now that are involved in autism. Sometimes the same genes can be involved in autism and in epilepsy. And for the other part, we have thousands of variations that will make you a little bit more autistic, difficulties in read the mind in the eyes, to look at the emotion of the people. And so that's two kinds of autism. And this is important. Science is not done by old people. The science is done by the young students who are doing all this wonderful work. And I think it's important to recognize this. So please do science. So this is the two last paper that we made recently, and one with Varun and Simon Baron-Cohen. We found briefly that the monogenic forms of autism, when you have a single variant, it is more associated with intellectual disability, epilepsy, and when you have these polygenic forms, these thousands of variants, you have more autism without intellectual disability, okay? In this paper with Thomas, we looked at the variants, the genetic variants that are associated with autism, but we looked in the general population in this room. And we found that some people can have a diagnosis and some people don't. So what is going on? Why some people have difficulties, some people can flourish? We really want to understand what's going on here. And that's why there was a really nice news and views on our paper, is to try to understand, yes, genetics is important, but what can we say now? If you have a genetic, you might have difficulties, but maybe in some environment, you can flourish. This is super important. So, this is like, if you like alcohol, Picot Sur, for example, you know that there is very strong alcohol sometimes and very light alcohol, and you remember the day after the quantity and the quality of the alcohol you drank. And this is the same with this orchestra. If this woman stops singing, you will hear immediately the difference, okay? And if only one of these musicians stop playing, you will not hear the difference. So it's exactly the same with the genetic variations. This is Madame Sheng-Free. So when this gene is really not working, it makes a huge difference. And these little variants, each one doesn't make so much difference. Here, if you remove one dot, you can still see the Eiffel Tower. If you remove one drop, you still have a wave. But together, they make a difference. I hope if you have another way of explaining, please come to me. So to understand, so we know better now what these genes are doing. So for the singer, we know that the function of the genes are more in the gene expression, per se, and also at the synapse, this connection between neurons. So here, these genes are connected. So sometimes they are doing only autism, sometimes it's autism plus intellectual disability, sometimes it's autism plus epilepsy. For the other part, the players, we know much better, and we know that these variations, they are not only playing for autism. They are also have contributed to ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But they also unfortunately, also play a role in major depression. So you see, autism, it's not yes or no, it's much like a cocktail of different variations. So, what about these genes? Are they specific to humans? Not at all. They are also in mice. So we could look at the function of these genes in the mouse. So on the left, the mouse, on the right, Elodie, who is looking at the mice. And she's an ethologue. She's looking at the behavior of the mice. And what she has found is that the first things we realize that this is a wild-type mouse, and this is, on the right, a mutant mice carrying the same mutation like the autistic individuals. So I hope you will see the difference. Can you see it? So I always say, if a mouse is going to a clinic like this, it will go directly to the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder specialist. Okay, so that's one thing. Second, this is a male, and we will introduce a female in the cage. This is a wild-type male, and this is the mutant mouse. So, this is very nice, I think. And here. I hope you see the difference. So it's not that he's not interested, you will see, you will go to her, but it's really not like this one. So I don't know if you know, but mice can sing. They sing in the ultrasound. So we have microphone, and we can try to understand what these mice are saying. And what we found is that the Sheng2 mice, the mutant mice, they have lower vocalization, a different type of vocalization. So we wanted to understand better what is social interaction. It took us 8 years to do that, but now we have the best mouse tracker system in the world. Everything that a mouse is doing, it goes to a database, so we can really understand what this social interaction in mice. We really wanted to be a mouse in a cage, so we make this image so you can feel how it is to be a mouse in a cage at the Institut Pasteur in France. So now we have a little bit like a Rosetta Stone. We have the behavior, we can track the behavior, and we have the vocalization. So we can now have a better idea on what these mice are saying, is it communication, and what is the difference. So to help, this is super important. So now that we identified some cause for autism, that we have a better understanding of the genes, what they are doing, now it's super important to use this knowledge to help people. So one of the first aspects is medical care. For some individuals with autism, we will need a medical care. And so what we found is that if you take cells from the patients, you derive them in neurons. It took us 5 years to say that, and I'm saying this in 10 seconds. And we screen for molecules to improve the expression of the gene. And what we found that lithium, it's a drug that is used in bipolar disorder, can restore the activity of the gene. And this is what Gina Toligiano have found also. She took our results and she showed that it was working in the mice. The mice were grooming and it's better. They are more calm. But I always say it's an amazing period currently to be a mouse because you can be cured of everything. But in humans, it's much more complex. And remember, these kids have intellectual disability, epilepsy. So we started now a randomized control trial using lithium, and we will like the results very soon. Hopefully, I will come back to Chile and tell you if it's working. But more importantly, I mean, it's so important that, yes, we need some medical care for some people, but we need also less stigma and more recognition of neurodiversity. So this is why we have done R2D2, mental health. It's with people, neurodiverse, adults, adolescents. We want to work on risk, but also on resilience. Autism, yes or no? ADHD, yes or no? It's important, interesting, but what is more important is how people function. What is the autonomy of the person? And we need participatory research to work with the people. So, my last slide. She's a person with autism, and I like the way she phrased it. She illustrates. She said, when I talk with medical doctor, it's funny because they see my life like this. And it's funny because I see my life like this. And I think it's important. I mean, I'm a geneticist, and yes, there are genes important, but a gene is not like this, boom, and you have the phenotype, autism. It's much more complex. You have to read people with autism. They are really amazing. I mean, they can talk about how they function in life, and I think it's super important to be aware. It's a new world. This is a man. It's in Spain. It's in Spanish. He discovered the autism of his daughter, and it's a beautiful YouTube and book. And on the T-shirt of the little girl, it is written, "I am unique, just like everyone else." Okay, merci beaucoup.